turns out the Air Force and the CIA weren't exactly twiddling their thumbs. They were busy investigating UFOs like cosmic Sherlock Holmes, all on our hard-earned taxpayer dime.
First of all, what went through my mind is how stupid am I to actually volunteer for this?
Curious cats, welcome to Bizarro, where I'm here to confirm your wildest suspicions. And no, you're not experiencing deja vu. It's just the same old podcast with a new conspiracy to unveil. I mean, seriously, what could possibly go wrong when we start confirming conspiracy theories? I mean, it's not like we're unlocking hidden government secrets or anything. Anyway, I'm your host, Brittany, and this is Conspiriality, where we dive into the murky waters of conspiracy theories that, against all odds, turned out to be more factual than your average reality TV show. So get ready to have your skepticism put to shame. Today, we'll just be skimming the surface of those once dismissed conspiracy theories that have decided to join the ranks of reality. Yes. And hey, don't fret. We'll even sprinkle a few contemporary conspiracies that might make your curiosity connections in an episode called Truth is Stranger. Now, of course, we will be covering these true conspiracies via story time. Now remember, skepticism is encouraged, but keeping an open mind is, well, optional. We're skeptical, so you don't have to be. Or should you? I don't know. It's complicated. Well, grab your popcorn and settle into your conspiracy-friendly armchair because it's time to flaunt that tinfoil hat like a fashion statement. Congratulations, truth seekers. You've been vindicated.
Have been home to sinister and inhumane projects, operations so dark and twisted that they defy belief. When whispers of these deeds reached the public, the media and population often dismissed them as mere conspiracy theories, the wild imaginings of overactive minds. But then, the unimaginable happened. The truth came out. These were not the fantasies of the paranoid. These were real events, hidden behind layers of secrecy and deceit. Today, we're going to dive into some of the craziest conspiracy theories that turned out to be nothing but the cold, hard truth. So let's get into it.
Now, before we dive in, have you ever wondered the origins of the phrase conspiracy theory? Well, believe it or not, it made its debut at a New York Times article in 1863. Yes, you heard me right, 1863. They were talking about the same wild ideas and opinions we're dealing with today. It seems like it's even in those good old days that they were wrestling with what we now call fake news. So in this ancient article, they grumbled about the press being in cahoots with the elite cabal. Can you imagine back then folks were already pointing fingers at media bias? It's like history has a twisted sense of deja vu. Now, fast forward to 1967, and the CIA starts tossing around this term like confetti at a parade, using it to label anyone who dared to blow the whistle on the official narrative. For instance, the Kennedy assassination. Now, that's a rabbit hole you could get lost in. But hey, there is a lot more to unpack here, so let's move on. Just remember the term conspiracy theory has always been causing trouble for as long as I can remember. So remember Roswell? Well, now what if I told you that it turns out the Air Force's story might have been a tad fanciful? And hey, if controlling the weather sounds like a superpower, well, you're not entirely off. It's actually a government skill. Oh, and get ready for this. For a brief spell, we actually had an uninvited lady president calling shots. No, not Kamala, but nice try. So lean in, fellow aficionados of the peculiar, because reality is often stranger than fiction. And the truth is like an onion. You know, it's got layers, and peeling them back is just half the fun. I mean, really, for those that have never peeled an onion before, burn. So our first conspiracy is Roswell. Roswell, that classic tale of weather balloons and little green men back in 1947. Now, the Army forces declared, no, it's not a UFO, just a regular old weather balloon. Now, UFO enthusiasts were left disappointed, but trust me, the conspiracy wheels were turning behind the scenes. Now, as the years sauntered on, interest in the crash went on a roller coaster ride, hitting its peak in the 70s and the 90s. Those true believers, they weren't having the weather balloon story. Nope. They went all in on the claims of the government shadiness. Now, the Defense Department tried to play the whole thing off as UFO fantasies, blaming a weather balloon for triggering imaginations. Classic move, right? But hold on, because the truth was still wrapped in mystery. Now, it turns out the desert debris wasn't a weather balloon, nor was it a UFO joyriding through the Milky Way. Nope. It was the result of Project Mogul, a Cold War scheme to spy on the Soviet nuke secrets using airborne eavesdropping. A balloon, people. A balloon with a spy mission. Bravo, Cold War. Bravo. Now, fast forward to the 90s, and in New Mexico, reps started rattling cages demanding that the Pentagon cough up the classified goods. The result? An Air Force report in 94 that spilled the beans. Now, they admitted that the debris was probably a neglected mogul balloon that decided to land uninvited on a ranch. Now, the report made sure to squash any alien notions and green-skinned beings. So, why the weather balloon fib? Well, it's the classic case of better the devil, you know? Either the authorities genuinely believed in the balloon's meteorological innocence, or they desperately tried to cloak the Project Mogul in a veil of extraterrestrial tales. After all, the last thing the military wanted was their high-tech spy games to get exposed. UFOs? Those were even more believable than the truth, apparently. So here's the kicker. Some still insist that the cover-up lives on. Whether it's weather balloons, spy balloons, or little green men, it's Roswell's story and it's sticking around. Now, there's much conflicting information on Roswell, which is exactly what keeps some of these stories alive. Now, I know that all of you out there want to know what I believe. Well, let me tell you. Now, I can't help but feel like this reminds me of that Chinese spy balloon found back in our skies earlier this year. So, if you can remember, it was allowed to fly around surveillancing Americans for days before it was finally shot down by the military. So, as I delved into this newfound treasure trove of information, I swear I felt deja vu tingling through my tin hat.
My hypothesis that an aluminum foil hat will prevent the government from reading your thoughts.
Now, of course, Project Mogul may have a new wardrobe now, with the government using similar gizmos to track nukes and forecast the weather. But let's be real. The Chinese government balloon shenanigans? I mean, they're still wrapped in mystery. Seriously. Question is, why did that supposed Chinese balloon have more American parts on it than a 4th of July barbecue? It's almost as if they ordered it from an online build-your-own spy balloon kit.
Bought some massive weather balloons off eBay anyway, which were made in China.
He's not a nerd.
And yet truly believe the government's story this time around? Absolutely. Until they change it again and again and again and again. But here's my question. If Roswell was merely a case of mistaken identity involving weather balloons or spy gadgets, why, oh why, has the government been playing hide and seek with UFOs for decades? So many questions, which brings me to our second conspiracy.
Gotcha.
Which is that the U.S. government has investigated UFOs for years. Oh, the gold standard of conspiracy theories. The good old U.S. government dishing out millions for top-tier UFO research. Now, you can practically hear the X-Files theme song in the background, right? Cleve R. Woodson Jr. of the Washington Post nailed it in 2017 when he remarked, "For decades, we were fed the story that Area 51 was just a mirage and that our dear government was more interested in traffic rules than little green beings. Oh, how they assured us that anyone suggesting otherwise was just a few tin foil hats short of a picnic." Classic move. Now, you see, it turns out the Air Force and the CIA weren't exactly twiddling their thumbs. They were busy investigating UFOs like cosmic Sherlock Holmes, all on our hard-earned taxpayer dime. Oh, but don't be fooled. According to the government, UFOs were just the stuff of wild imaginations. Yet they had their priorities straight. Sure, there's nothing to see here, but let's blow millions of tax dollars to keep looking. Fast forward to 2017, the year when conspiracy theorists collectively gave a fist pump. The Pentagon confirmed that it had its own VIP club for UFOs, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, aka AATIP. So a cool $22 million and a $600 billion budget went into this interstellar extravaganza, launched by the then Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. The AATIP aimed to tackle abnormalities in the skies ranging from enemy aircraft to commercial drones to possible alien hijinks. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The alien encounters were just the icing on the cake. So experts were quick to dampen the extraterrestrial parade, with former space shuttle engineer James E. Oberg shouting from the science mountaintop, "Hold on, there are plenty of boring explanations." Oh, the saga of government secrecy, where the truth might be out there, but it's wrapped in bureaucracy and served with a side of skepticism. Okay, so my opinion? So I'll say that all the recent information that I've seen about the government admitting to the existence of UFOs in our skies, civilians coming out with their stories of alien and UFO encounters, and military video footage of UFOs. Oh, wait, sorry, let me be a little bit more politically correct. AEPs, wait, that's an electric company. UEPs, don't cancel me. We can't help but wonder what the heck is going on here. Fact is, it's definitely interesting how throughout history we see ancient people referencing such experiences through hieroglyphics, sculptures, and what we would consider as folklore, etc. We have the Foo Fighters. Now, this is where both the Allied and Axis pilots reported seeing mysterious glowing objects that seemed to follow their aircrafts. Now, these were often referred to as...
They were spotted around the world and became known as Foo Fighters. According to Haynes, who has investigated hundreds of newspaper and eyewitness accounts, the descriptions of the Foo Fighters are disturbingly alike.
Pilots would report glowing, luminous balls of light that would come up from the ground, often orange or red, anywhere from 1 foot to 6 feet in diameter, would accelerate up to their altitude and then level off very quickly and then stay beside the airplane. They would fly either singly or in pairs or in trio or 4 objects, oftentimes in rigid formation, which is important. And all of these flight dynamics point in one way or another to a fairly high intelligent level of guidance.
And then we have the 1896 to 1897 airship sightings, and that's in the late 19th century. There were numerous reports of sightings of mysterious airships flying over various parts of the United States. Now, these sightings led to speculations about advanced technology or even extraterrestrial craft. And then we have the Battle of Los Angeles, and that was in 1942. So that was during World War II, and there was a large number of anti-aircraft shells that were fired into the skies over Los Angeles in response to reports of unidentified objects.
Anti-aircraft batteries were immediately put on green alert or ready to fire as the military tracked the mysterious object's eastwardly path approaching the California coast. When the UFO was within only a few miles of Los Angeles at 2:21 a.m., the air raid sirens were sounded and a blackout was ordered. Reports of enemy airplane lights soon began flooding into the Air Force Information Center. Commanders were baffled, however, because at the same time, the unidentified object vanished from radar. At 3:16 a.m., the first military visual contact with the mystery object was supposedly established, and anti-aircraft forces fired the first of what would end up being more than 1,400 rounds of ammunition into the sky over the course of the next hour.
The event sparked UFO speculation and conspiracy theories. Well, not a UFO sighting per se, but the Tunguska event in Siberia involved a massive explosion that flattened trees over a wide area. Now, the exact cause is still debated, with theories including a meteorite or an exploding UFO. But throughout history, various ancient cultures have depicted flying objects in their art and writings. For example, some ancient Indian texts mention flying machines known as vimanas. Now, I have to ask myself, do I think that 100% of these accounts are lies? Nothing is 100%. And even if one account is true, then that changes the entire paradigm. So then, what could be in our skies that resemble UFOs or aliens? Now, with that said, I'm going to shock you. I personally do not believe that aliens and UFOs exist, but not in the sense that we're being told. In a nutshell, many believe in extraterrestrial life, but my research that I've done, I believe that they're interterrestrial in nature. Think about that for a second. Now, I'll leave that information for another show. Either way, we can't forget that the government has acknowledged that UEPs exist. Okay, so I'm done talking about UEPs. Let's talk about WMs. I don't know. I just made that up. It stands for weather militarization. The good old days when American scientists decide they needed to up their game and militarize the weather. You know, just your typical casual weather warfare strategy. In 2014, the dynamic duo Joseph Uszynski and Joseph Parent delved into a treasure trove of conspiracy-laden letters to editors spanning over a century. Now, they were on a mission to figure out which ones were indulging in the juicy conspiratorial mindset. So it turns out people were quite imaginative. Now, these letters were a little buffet of conspiracy theories, from Boers to conservationists. But wait, let's not breeze past the 1958 gem that had folks whispering about American scientists trying to find a method for controlling the weather. You know, just casual mad scientist stuff.
Created weather tampering techniques so that the New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans and to control the rest. Would you explain what you were trying to say?
Well, what I was trying to say is exactly what I said. There is weather control techniques. We have the entire patents on the equipment. Number two, Senator Claiborne Pell's complete statement and story of his own that not only does it exist, but that we even utilize it as far back as the Vietnam War. You might want to touch base.
The 50s, when Fidel Castro accused the U.S. of weaponized hurricanes, because who doesn't want to control the weather and wreak havoc? Meanwhile, in the land of experts, someone was weaving off the whole weather warfare idea, telling a Senate Select Committee, "Don't worry, we won't be using thunderstorms as artillery." Okay, maybe not those exact words, but close. Now, the expert did admit, with a little wink, that they'd completely rule it out, so maybe more science lab parties were needed. Now, fast forward to the 70s, and rumors were sprouting like daisies during the Vietnam War. Someone was dropping the hint that maybe they were playing with precipitation to make the enemy's life damp. But Nixon's Secretary of Defense swooped in like a true superhero, denying rainmaking over North Vietnam with a flat, "Nope, not us." The government did a rain dance and admitted trying to slow down the Ho Chi Minh Trail with some liquid sunshine. Now, Nixon's Secretary of Defense chimed in with a "my bad, folks," and suddenly rainmaking was an official oopsie. Now, it turns out they had indeed indulged in a meteorological mischief over North Vietnam in 67 and 68. But no worries, they were just keeping the raincoats busy. Okay, why not call me crazy? But this whole weather situation is bringing me climate change vibes. Just saying. But truth be told, you can check out my page and see all these receipts that I have on the government documents detailing international efforts on weather modifications. Let's move on to something a bit more fun, like the ultimate party foul. Yes, I'm talking about the government poisoning alcohol during Prohibition. You guys, this did happen. The Prohibition era. Because making something illegal is the best way to ensure that nobody does it, right? Well, not quite. Turns out that people were as keen on a good time as ever, even with the ban on booze. Now, here's the kicker. When those who dared to indulge ended up pushing up daisies, the grapevine was buzzing with conspiracy goodness. Now, the grand accusation? That the government, my friends, was allegedly spiking alcohol with lethal doses of oops, you're dead poison. So picture this. Government agents moonlighting as mixologists, concocting a killer cocktail of danger. Now, the government always thinking of innovative ways to keep the masses in line? Yes, that was their plan. A 1926 issue of the Camden Morning Post took a sip of the theory, declaring, why, of course, the government is slipping poison into alcohol. Because who doesn't love a lethal twist in their cocktails, right? Oh, but it didn't stop there. People were pointing fingers faster than you can say bottoms up. Now, a senator, no less, took a bold stance and declared that the government was essentially moonlighting as a real-life Grim Reaper. Legalizing murder? Why not? After all, who needs regular old law enforcement when you have chemically induced consequences? The government's twist on mixology, because nothing says party foul like a touch of poison in your cocktail. But here's the kicker. They weren't hiding it in a covert back room. No. They put their cards on the table and even pinned a little masterpiece on the matter. Forget secret recipes. The government had a whole short book devoted to poisoning alcohol. But wait, before you jump to conclusions, let's not blame prohibition just yet. Now, the government in all its wisdom had a brilliant reason. Taxes. So it turns out taxing booze meant for sipping was just so tempting. So they figured, why not make it tax-free by adding a little unpalatable twist? So flashback to 1906, when Congress had a light bulb moment and introduced the Tax-Free Denatured Alcohol Act, a law designed to safeguard industries that had a thirst for industrial alcohol. But of course, this grain plan involved a plot twist, making alcohol utterly repulsive for human consumption. Because when it comes to ruining a party, the government really went all out. So fast forward to the Roaring 20s, and a few too many souls were bidding adieu during the holiday season. Now, the poison in our booze tactic had everyone raising their eyebrows. But did the government flinch? No, they just shrugged and waved their "not our fault" card. According to the government, it was a case of not it. An expert in a snazzy congressional record put on a show claiming that the deaths were not linked to their industrial alcohol escapades. No, absolutely not. It was straight up wood alcohol. Now, that was the true villain, and that's what they insisted. Now, Minerva. Why would this remind me of Moderna? Minerva from Lincoln Star chimed in, putting it plainly, people, it's not us. It's the alcohol itself, the straight up no chaser variety. That's the real troublemaker. There you have it, folks. A government mixing up a mean batch of unappetizing cocktails, all in the name of saving a buck and keeping the masses from enjoying the forbidden elixir. It's not a party until someone brings out the tax evasion and chemical concoctions. Right. Cheers to the government that always knows how to keep spirits low. Now, I don't want to get in trouble here, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say to some, now not me, of course, but to some, they might wonder if the government could still be getting away with poisoning its own people for monetary control. I mean, that's a laughable thing, right? It's not like we've ever willingly put anything into our bodies that could ever be tampered with by the government or big pharma. I mean, we'd see that coming from a mile away, would we not? Duh. Now, this brings us to our next conspiracy. This is the tale of the First Lady who ran the country. Unofficially, of course. Because nothing screams democracy like a lady who wasn't elected, right? Here's the whole historical thing. Now, where Edith Bolingold, decked out in inherited wealth and a taste for Parisian couture, found herself hitched to President Woodrow Wilson in 1915. Now, just 3 years later, she was getting accused of running the entire show. So it turns out Edith wasn't the typical candidate for the most powerful, unelected position ever. She went from it's too cold in my dorm college dropout to marrying a jewelry store owner in D.C. Because why not? Widowed and suddenly loaded, she lived the European high life, got into the whole car driving thing, and even snatched a White House physician as a friend. Then came that fateful hike where she met Woodrow Wilson. And it was like destiny, but less poetic and more political. Now, Wilson fell head over heels, and soon enough, they were married. His advisors were like, whoa, man, slow down. But Edith wasn't going anywhere. Now, they tried a fake love letter scheme, hoping to drive her away, but she just shrugged it off like a pro. Now, cue the marriage. World War I and the League of Nations jazz. Now, Edith didn't just take the title of First Lady. She took it up a notch. She had a backstage pass to classified info. She screened the president's mail and sat in on meetings because why let politicians have all the fun, right? Now, fast forward, Wilson's pushing his League of Nations gig and collapsing from exhaustion like a champ. And then Edith steps in like a true MVP, making decisions left and right. And when Wilson gets a stroke and cannot adult anymore, Edith takes the reins like a boss. Now, she controls who he sees, reads him policy stuff, and basically runs the place. Of course, it's all cool because there's no major crisis at the time, just some firing and eyebrow-raising incidents. Now, Edith's stewardship, as she called it, lasted a year and 5 months. And it's a good thing there weren't any big messes on the stove. Now, Edith might have guarded Wilson's well-being, but her choices could have messed up his legacy. And so the curtain falls on the unconventional tale of the First Lady President, not elected, but definitely unforgettable. Can you imagine if that happened today? I mean, like, what if we had like a president who was, I don't know, unfit to run the country and had some sort of stroke or lapse of brain function? I mean, do you think his wife could secretly run the country? Oh. The Dalai Lama was a CIA agent. Dalai Lama's perpetual smile might just be thanks to his secret stint as a six-figure government earner back in the swinging 60s. That's what they say. According to those total legit declassified intelligence papers, he apparently pocketed a cool $180,000 as part of the CIA's behind-the-scenes sponsorship of the Tibetan resistance extravaganza, which, by the way, ranked in a casual $1.7 million annually. You know, just a little disruption and a light infrastructure hampering for China's sake. Oh, the 60s. Now, rumor has it they were all in on this secret Cold War party with the CIA waving its Disrupt China's Infrastructure banner like it was confetti. Picture this. Tibetan guerrillas funded in Nepal, a hush-hush military boot camp in Colorado, and Tibet houses cropping up in New York and Geneva, all for the cause, of course. And let's not forget those top-secret reconnaissance teams getting their shopping lists of supplies. The objective was to keep the political concept of an autonomous Tibetan alive and rustle up a resistance against anything communist China might cover up. Now, it's like a spy movie, but with prayer flags. But hold up. The declassified files spill some hilarious beans, like the Tibetan apparently weren't exactly born with conspiratorial wizardry. Budget-wise, in the land of cloak and dagger, it seems transparency wasn't a thing. There's a memo dated in January 9th, 1964, casually listing support of 2,100 Tibetan guerrillas based in Nepal. Now, 500,000 followed by the star of the show, subsidy to the Dalai Lama, $180,000. The grand total, a snazzy $1,737,000, just pocket change, right? Fast forward to the end of the 60s when the party ends. The Tibetans eventually got ghosted by the CIA when Nixon's administration went all in on that budding diplomatic thing with China. But hey, what goes around comes around. The whole thing ended up like a comedy of errors, like Tibetans sort of causing a ruckus in their homeland, only to advertently give China the perfect "foreign powers made us do it" excuse. Smooth move, Tibet. So there you have it, a secret recipe for Tibetan independence with a sprinkle of humor and a dash of history. Now, I think it's safe to say the CIA loves to pair with other influential powers. However, this next power had the opposite effect on the CIA's plans, making him a target. John Lennon was being followed by the FBI. So back in the good old days of 1971, when John Lennon decided to give peace a chance an unintentional movement that set off party crashers for the Nixon camp. Now, it seems Nixon and the gangs weren't fans of Lennon's anti-war tunes. Now, he wanted to snag the FBI's secret stash of Lennon files. The FBI played hard to get, citing national security like it was some sort of high-stakes game. But Weiner wasn't one to back down. Oh no. He marched his Freedom of Information case all the way to the Supreme Court. It's like a history textbook meets a legal thriller. Now, spoiler alert, the FBI eventually caved and spilled the beans. Now, in a delightful chat with Terry Gross, Weiner spilled the tea with his book, Gimme Some Truth, The John Lennon FBI Files. And if it wasn't enough, he even lent his expertise to the documentary, The U.S. versus John Lennon, where luminaries like Gore Vidal, Angela Davis, and even Yoko Ono herself shared their 2 cents about the whole FBI saga. Because really, what's a little government surveillance when you're a Beatle, right? Or own a bunch of rights to Beatles music? The foreshadowing is bizarre. Now, this kind of reminds you of recent claims from multiple celebrities accusing powers that be of control and surveillance. They've been silenced for speaking out. Now, their methods for doing so is, well, sometimes hard to believe. But what we do know is that history repeats itself. And if Kanye said it, it has to be true. Speaking of, the next one is MK Ultra. Now, back in the day, the CIA had some peculiar hobbies. Now picture this. CIA Director Alan Dulles stood before an audience ranting about brain warfare and Soviet mind tricks. Sounds like a plot for a B-list sci-fi movie. Nope, it was reality. And the year was 1953, and the CIA was cooking up plans for some mind-bending experiments. Now, they duped it MK Ultra, and it wasn't your average science fair project. It was more like a twisted mix of electroshock therapy, hypnosis, radiation, and a splash of LSD. Yeah, I said LSD. Now, they thought it would be useful for everyone from the interrogations to teleporting bodies. Okay, maybe not the last part, but they tested their mind games in all sorts of folks, from soldiers to prisoners to even gangsters. And just when you thought it couldn't get any weirder, enter Operation Midnight Climax. Imagine a bedroom decked out like a weird 1950s romance movie set, curtains, can-can dancers, the whole deal. But it wasn't for romancing, it was a trap. Prostitutes lured unsuspecting dudes and slipped them some LSD-laced drinks, and the whole scene was watched behind a two-way mirror. Now, the CIA was basically hosting the trippiest reality show ever. So fast forward to 1963, and the CIA decided these experiments were getting a bit too far out there. And they called it quits, but not before an awkward chat with Congress in the 1970s, where they spilled some of the strangest secrets. So it turns out their MK Ultra files were destroyed conveniently to save participants from embarrassment, because nothing says privacy like mind-altering experiments and erasing all evidence. So there you have it, the CIA's funky journey into mind control, where brains met bizarre and government agents doubled as mind scientists. Now, you need to ask yourself, if this whole MK Ultra experiment stuff was so successful, and it was, why on earth would the government actually put an end to it? Or maybe they didn't. We know that throughout history, governments have sought to control information and propaganda to maintain power and influence public opinion, especially during wartime. So why not use those that are in the limelight to influence certain agendas, like celebrities and politicians? Seems like they could influence the masses pretty inconspicuously. Now, good thing I'm not in charge of the MK Ultra project. You all would be in trouble. Honestly, who doesn't love hearing a good story about how the government lies to its people and runs experiments on unknowing civilians? Brace yourself, because the latest revelation in this conspiracy saga is truly disheartening. These poor victims were spun a web of government lies so thick you could knit a sweater out of it. They were told one thing while something entirely different coursed through their veins, and the cruelest twist of all, they were intentionally denied treatment for their illnesses, all in the twisted name of coercion. So back in 1932, a curious little scientific experiment kicked off down in Macon County, Alabama, and they called it the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in Negro males. Catchy, right? So the United States Public Health Service, the USPHS, was the ringmaster, and they had quite the show planned. Blood tests, x-rays, spinal taps, and even autopsies, all in the name of science. Now here's where it gets interesting. The grand goal was to observe the natural history of untreated syphilis in African American communities. But here's the kicker. These folks had no clue. Nope. They were told that they were getting treatment for bad blood. Treatment? More like a wild goose chase because they got zilch. And here's the real knee slapper. Even when penicillin, the wonder drug of the century, strutted onto the scene as a surefire syphilis cure, most of these poor men never saw a whiff of it. To truly grasp the absurdity of the Tuskegee experiment, you need a healthy dose of societal context, a deep dive into history, and the startling realization that government agencies had more chances to stop this human experiment than you have excuses for not doing your laundry. To get into the history, check it out on my website. But we'll fast forward. Basically, they rounded up gents around the age of 25 to 60 and told them they were getting free medical care for bad blood, a term that seemed to cover everything from anemia to syphilis to just feeling lousy. Now, these men, thinking that they'd be cured in 6 months, went through this whole shebang: physical exams, x-rays, spinal taps, and even autopsies when they finally met their maker. But here's where it gets darkly amusing. They couldn't convince enough guys to join the party because some thought that these checkups were actually recruiting drives for the military. So what did they do? They started examining women and kids too. And when it came to syphilis, if you were the right age and got the diagnosis, then congrats, you were in the study. Now, if not, you got the real treatment: mercury and arsenic-laden medicines. Yikes. Fast forward, researchers decided to keep this experiment going long term. They roped in over 200 control patients who didn't have syphilis, but that could change at any time. Everyone got ineffective medicines to make them think that they were being treated. As time went by, participants started skipping appointments. So then they hired a nurse, which is Eunice Rivers, to be their Uber driver and personal chef and medication courier, all hot commodities during the Great Depression. To sweeten the deal, they even covered their funeral costs. Talk about service. Now here's the real punchline. Researchers actively worked to make sure that these poor souls didn't receive actual treatment for syphilis. They told local doctors not to treat them and even pulled some of them out of the army to avoid treatment. Now, the original plan to observe syphilis naturally in the community turned into a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Henderson Act was like, hey, let's publicly fund tests and treatments for venereal diseases. And in 1943, by 1947, penicillin was all the rage for syphilis. Now, the USPHS was all in. Let's open rapid treatment centers. And guess what? They actively prevented 399 men from getting their sweet penicillin. Now, in 1952, around 30% of these guys got penicillin anyway. But the USPHS was like, nah, they won't seek treatment. I mean, they're too stoic. In reality, they thought they were already being treated, so go figure. Then the researchers changed their tune, and in 1965, they were like, oops, it's too late for penicillin now. Mind you, penicillin works at all stages of syphilis, so that was really convenient, right? Now, even though the Nuremberg Code and the Declaration of Helsinki were like, don't experiment on humans, the Centers of Disease Control took over in 1969 and said, let's keep going. It wasn't until 1972 that a whistleblower spilled the beans in the New York Times, and the study finally ended. By then, only 74 test subjects were left alive, and this was out of 399. So 128 died of syphilis or its complications. 40 wives got infected, and 19 kids were born with congenital syphilis. Now, there was public outrage, and the NAACP sued, and things got settled for $10 million. It took until 2009 for the last affected family member to pass away. Now, all this drama led to the National Research Act in 1974, and the Office of Human Research Protections were born. But not to worry, now we have this thing called informed consent and institutional review boards. But the Tuskegee study left a mark. Life expectancy for Black men dropped 1.4 years when this mess came to light, and it still affects the willingness of Black folk to participate in medical research today. And here's the kicker. Nobody got prosecuted for this syphilis circus. Now, these historical facts, well documented and neatly presented here, are like breadcrumbs that we can use to navigate the murky forest of the future. So chin up, historical buffs. We're just connecting the dots. For the record, these are not the only documented accounts of Truth a Stranger. So if you're interested in knowing more, let me know. I wonder what other conspiracies will turn up to be true next. So what have we learned today, class? As George Orwell would say, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Turns out we weren't as crazy as they made us feel.
The truth, as usual, lies somewhere between the tinfoil hat blocking the mind waves and the tinfoil hat not blocking it. So maybe they're not so crazy after all.
Now, there are patterns to be seen and discovered in their tactics for controlling those that are asleep. So wake up. Thanks for joining me today on this Truth a Stranger episode of Bizarro, where we explore the strange and the bizarro. And who knows, maybe next time I'll catch you on some strange appearing monolith in the desert somewhere. See ya!